This gentleman next to me is Rick Levine, and he is he's a friend of mine for many years, and he's one of the first. Anyway, he's got more experience in the game field than I do. And after he left Mattel, I kind of lost track of him, but he had a very interesting career after that. So his experience also expands to the handheld games, which were fairly popular around 1980. And which are many examples of which are in the Video Game Museum. So I'll turn it over to Rick.
Thank you, John. John, of course, did Astro Smash for Mattel Intellivision, for those of you that have played and enjoyed it, like I did. I remember when John came to Mattel and started working over at APH, which was a consulting group that had worked with Mattel to develop the software for Intellivision. And John started working on Astro Smash, and when he got it going to a point where it could be played, I remember that I played the heck out of that game, and every time I got higher scores, he kept making the game harder. So if you found the game challenging, it's because I kept driving it to higher levels, and the game became very, very, very good, very difficult. Anyway, to go back to the start, I did begin at Mattel doing handheld games, and I want to give you a little bit of background. I won't let me do that, and then I'll go from there. First of all, I just want to say that this video games industry and working in it was just, I guess I got lucky, or just maybe it was the passion I had for doing games as a child, but I absolutely love it and have loved it, and love all the people that have worked in it as well. Just a great group of people in the video games industry. I had a friend growing up, very close friend named Michael Charles, and he and I played board games as kids. I went over to his house, I don't remember how many times, thousands of times, and we played chess, checkers, Risk, Stratego, Monopoly, you name it, and probably a lot of chess more than anything. Years later, as a mathematician, I was getting a degree at UCLA Math. I was programming Fortran in the computer lab using the key punch cards. I don't know if any of you have seen the old key punch cards that you sit there and type and it punches in little holes in the cards, and that's how we used to program. And we'd feed the cards into the card reader and wait hours for the results of our very small program, really, to come out and see whether we had any bugs in the program or not. And that's how we wrote programs when I was in college. I also used the slide rule, we didn't have calculators, in order to do my calculations for chemistry lab and physics lab. So anyway, I really didn't like programming that much at that point. I thought that was kind of tedious and boring, having to type into these key punch things and wait hours for results. But after I graduated college, I was a school teacher, and I became infatuated with what they were starting to call personal computers, which were really basically these little kits of the chips that you put together. I put together an 8080 machine called the Sol 20. I don't know if any of you remember that, but it was made by a company called Processor Technology, and it had an 8080 chip in it from Intel. And I programmed my first game, which was a chess game, in machine language, and it was 4K of programming. And that was basically, I got interested in that because of all the games that I had played as a kid. Well, after that, I moved on from teaching because I decided I wanted to go back and get a computer science degree because I thought personal computing was so fun. And I did. I went to UC Irvine. And while I was going to college, I started to think, oh, well, this is fun, but how am I going to afford this? And so I saw an ad in the newspaper, and it said Mattel is hiring programmers. And I thought, why are they hiring programmers? Mattel makes Barbie dolls. Well, I went to Mattel and interviewed with Michael Minkoff, who I ended up working with. Mike Minkoff and I did PBA bowling together. And I can't tell you how excited I was. It was the most amazing thing I ever saw, walking into this big, giant building. It looked like this kind of only a lot bigger, big hangar type space. And seeing these guys working on all kinds of little handheld games. At the time, there wasn't even the Intellivision yet. It was 1979. And people were just making these beeps and boops and programming on these little DEC PDP computers. They were mini computers that you had next to your desk. And I really wanted to work there, and I got the job. So I started working on, the first thing that Mike Minkoff put me on was the handheld gin game. You might have seen it in the Video Games Museum today, or take a look over there if you haven't. It's kind of an elongated game like this. It's got a display of the cards, and you can play gin rummy. And there was a few other games, I don't remember exactly what games you could play on there. But Mike asked me to program, see if I could add hearts, I think it was, to the gin rummy game, because they were thinking about putting out a second edition and adding hearts and a couple of other card games to what it had. And I did. I just thoroughly enjoyed adding hearts to the display. And I don't think that was ever published, but it was a lot of fun to work on. Then they actually talked to me, excuse me for a second, about doing a bowling game. And this was not Intellivision bowling yet, this was a handheld bowling game. And the way that we went about doing games back then was on these little mini computers. You would program in assembly language to interface with the hardware that they built for the prototype, and that was just to get the prototype done. And the cool thing at Mattel was that when you were doing handheld games, is you had model makers. Of course, model makers were used to doing like dolls and things like that. But in this case, the model makers would make the plastic and the different molds for the shape of the device that they were going to build. Well, we were building kind of a special device with the handheld bowling that was a little different than like if you've ever seen the handheld football or baseball or some of the other games that have the little lights that go off, beep, 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 which were very fun. But the bowling game required that we were going to make it so that you could actually slide this device back and forth inside that would have lights going off, so it would look like the ball rolling down the alley underneath this plastic. And you could adjust the way the ball was rolling, so you could try to roll it in, to get a strike. So you could put a curve on it and all that. Well, the way that I figured out how to program that was I needed to write a little software algorithm to see if I could program it so that you could see a ball rolling, and then when it hit the pins, calculate what pins fell over. We didn't really have, a lot of the stuff we did was in assembly language, so we didn't really have a high-level language to work with other than Fortran at the time. And so I programmed it using Fortran. I don't know if very many of you are familiar with Fortran, but Fortran was kind of a scientific language to work in. And it was kind of a challenge to not only write this algorithm, but get it to show me some kind of printout that would give me an idea of how this was going to work. Well, anyway, I eventually got an algorithm working for the bowling, and it worked pretty well. It would hit the pins and see the lights go off and the pins that it hit. At first, though, you'd see strange things where, like, there would be 5 pins left all over the lane that wouldn't be typical at all in real life. So I decided, I'd work on that some more. We got the algorithm working really well. And then finally, I got this great prototype where it all worked, and we kept score. You can see the score and stuff. Well, that was wonderful, but that was all about maybe 10 or 20K of code. 10 or 20,000 bytes of code. Well, then they told me how to stick that all on what they call a 4-bit microprocessor, which is what it ended up on inside of the actual finished product in all of those handheld games, with very limited memory and things. Well, they told me I had to get this into 1K, 1,000 bytes of code. I thought, oh my God, how am I going to do that? Well, it turns out these chips have all kinds of crazy instructions. Like in your normal assembly language programming with chips, usually you get things like a jump, or you can jump to another location based on the value of the accumulator, things like that. Well, these had those kind of instructions, but usually combined with some other crazy thing. Like you could do it where it was like based on this value in RAM and whether the accumulator had such and such in it, you could jump to this other location and then run inside of code that you had already run, and then jump out of it into another piece of code. So you could create the spaghetti code, get a little excited, where you could go from here to there to there, and just all over your code, and reuse code that you never thought you could reuse. And eventually, by some amazing miracle, they would squeeze it all into 1K. And to top it all off, and this is just kind of an aside that probably little known, but at Mattel at the time, the handheld games were starting to maybe wind down a little bit, so that in terms of sales, and so the costs became a very, very important thing. And so they were trying to get costs down, and there was a couple of guys warring with other parts of the department, talking about, well, I think in the bowling, I think we need to get this down to half a K instead of 1K. Well, I just flipped it that way. It's like, okay, I got this down to 1K. There's no way I can get this to half a K without taking out the scoring or something. And thank God they actually left it at 1K and we got it out the door at 1K. So that's the story of the handheld bowling game that they did. After that, I worked on a handheld, a low-cost baseball. I don't know if you've ever seen the handheld baseball. We wanted to do something called low-cost baseball, which ended up being called look-alive baseball. You may have seen pictures of it online. It actually had kind of a nice look to it. The hardware was cheaper, the amount of memory was a little less, and some of the gameplay was simpler. And it actually ended up being a very nice little game, but it never made it to market, and I sure wish I had some of the prototype of that to show you or to give to the museum, but I didn't have a prototype of it. But you've probably seen pictures of it because it did make it on brochures, and there is a picture of it online, I think, on a website. But they were kind of neat. There was a low-cost baseball and maybe a football, I think, and maybe one other. And then finally, I worked on a prototype of another game that just was my idea that I wanted to do, that I got permission to work on, which was a handheld volleyball game. The handheld volleyball game just had like some lights that indicated kind of the net area, and then there was 2 lights on each side of the net that it represented. That I don't remember whether there might have been maybe more lights, like maybe 4 in some kind of square on each side of the net, so that the players could move around. And then you had, of course, the ball would move back and forth across the net with just lights. And it was actually pretty fun. I thought it worked out. We had 1 player, you could play 1 player on each side or 2 player on each side with the buttons. And I really had a good time working on that one, but that never made it to market because, like I said, the handheld market kind of went down at that point. That's when I got told that the Intellivision group was going to start bringing in the programming in-house. Mike Minkoff had told me that up until that point, a company called APH was doing consulting with Microsoft, with Mattel. I worked at Microsoft years later. With Mattel to do the original games. They did the baseball and the football and a lot of the games that, I guess the skiing, a lot of the games that you may have seen with the Intellivision originally. And now they were going to teach us how to do programming for the Intellivision. And so their location, they were made up of a lot of former students from Caltech, and there might have been some students still going to Caltech, I'm not sure, at this APH Labs out in Pasadena, California. And I went out there with Mike Minkoff, and we started to learn and started to work on the Intellivision bowling, or PBA bowling as it became known as. And they had I believe it was a deck computer, a large time-sharing type computer. I guess it was a mini computer that was being time-shared that had, I believe, TOPS 10 or TOPS 20, something like that was the operating system running. It was kind of like a Unix type of operating system that DEC had built. And we did all of our development on that machine. And we did it all in assembly language. It was the assembly language for the Intellivision, which was GI 1600 machine code. And the graphics were done at Mattel. We had a couple of artists that had been used to doing artwork for the handheld games, and some of them might have also previously done work with the Barbie dolls and other kinds of artwork. And now they were being asked to do some artwork for these Intellivision games. And so we asked them to do a bowl or an animated graphic for us, which is what you see in the Intellivision bowling game, if you've seen that game before. And then I helped design what the bowling alley was going to look like. I was a bowler as a child. My whole family bowled, and so I had a lot of experience with bowling. And I knew that I wanted to have not just a bowling game, but I wanted to have a bowling game that you could adjust different factors that the professional bowlers have to deal with, like having to deal with the oil slickness of the lane, or the weight of the ball, or how many steps you took to get to the lane before you threw the ball, release of the ball. And then to get the sounds for the game, we went to a bowling alley and did taping of different bowling sounds. And unfortunately, the Intellivision audio, we weren't able to do certain subtleties of the sounds. I was talking to John Solt about that last night, that we had wanted to. So the clicking of the pins may sound a little bit more simplistic when you hear it in the game, of course. But still, we got at least a kind of a fun pin clicking sound, and the ball rolling in the gutter or the ball rolling down the lane type of sounds. And eventually we got the bowling game done. So 4K of programming. Like I said, the consultants helped us to understand the sort of the operating system that they put in the Intellivision. You know, it had like certain software that we could take advantage of, and certain basic graphic cell pictures that were in the Intellivision that you could take advantage of and reuse, and that's how you got the kind of blocky graphics that you saw. The pins were made up of some sprites, sprites being the graphics that move within the game, but you only had a certain number of sprites, and we didn't have enough for all the pins. So the way that we did all 10 pins is some of the pins in the back are actually static graphics, just using the static graphics, not the moving graphics. And then once the pins in the front hit some of the pins in the back, we would switch some of the pins in the back to sprites, and the other pins would just kind of disappear real quick. And so those are the kinds of things that I'm sure you've heard stories on the Atari where they had to do amazing things to get sprites working. We had to do these kind of kooky things in the Intellivision as well. So let's see, that's the story of PBA bowling. As I said, John Soul came in and was working on Astro Smash the last few months while we were working on bowling and getting that done. Well, one other thing that you might find interesting is the bowling, all the games that were being developed, we stored them not on like hard disks or even cassettes or anything like that. We had these huge disk pads, right, John? They were about so big around, and you lifted them up with a handle, and you stick them inside of the computer basically, and there was a slot to stick them in, and they were your hard disk storage essentially. That's where you put the programming. From there, I had left Mattel because I was working on the game all day and even some nights. And at the same time, I was getting a computer science degree at UC Irvine, which is about 30, 40 miles from Pasadena. And then sometimes going back to Mattel as well to work there. So the driving and working in the computer lab at UC Irvine at night was getting crazy. And so I decided that I needed to spend more time on this, getting my computer science degree, and I left Mattel at that time. And I worked at a medical electronics company while I was finishing up my computer science degree, and got experience with doing medical electronics. And I got to see some operations with ophthalmologists. They were doing cataract surgeries, which was very cool. I mean, you actually got to go and stand next to them while they were doing the work with the microscopes, fixing people's cataracts. And it was about maybe a year later, I got a phone call from Brian Doherty, who had worked at Mattel, and he had started a company called Imagine with other guys that you may have heard of, Rob Fulop and Bob Smith and other founders of Imagine. And Brian Doherty asked me to come up to Northern California and see if I'd be interested in working on Intellivision games again. Well, I got pretty excited about that. I went up there and he talked me into it. And so I liked the medical electronics work, but I liked games more. So I went up there and started working at Imagine in, I don't remember if I said it, but in Mattel I started in 1979. Now it was right around 1981, I think. Might have been middle 81, end of 81 that I started at Imagine. And there, it was Saratoga, California, had this little office space. There was maybe about 30 of us working in there. And then they moved over to Los Gatos, California, which is south of San Jose, California. So it's basically Silicon Valley. And I was working on, I think we had a VAX computer. So I was familiar with the Unix software and working in that environment. We were running Berkeley Unix. And started working, let me backtrack for a second. When I had my interview lunch with Brian Doherty, we talked about what kind of games I might work on if I came there. And I talked to him about doing watching the eye surgeries and how exciting that was to see doctors actually at work. And again, backtracking a little bit, one of my career goals when I was a student was I actually started as a pre-med major at UCLA. I had done that for a couple of years in the chemistry lab. And I actually was very interested in becoming a doctor, but I changed my mind when I discovered that I couldn't even handle beakers in a chemistry laboratory. I think I set the school record that year for broken glass in the chemistry lab. And so I kind of broke my dream of being a doctor, but here I was years later with an opportunity to do something about that. So I talked to Brian about how exciting it was with the doctors watching them do the surgeries. And wouldn't it be great if game players could enjoy doing surgeries as well? And that's where basically the idea of microsurgeon came from. And of course I had read, I was a science fiction nut as a kid as well, and of course I had read Fantastic Voyage and Seen the movie and various other science fiction that led me to want to do something like that as well. And so up there at Magic, I started working on the microsurgeon game, and that was going to originally run in 4K, like all the other Intellivision games, but they had just figured out how to do 8K games. And I think there was quite a few 8K games that came out in 1982. And then I think Intel, they might have even done was there like a 12K game or something? Yeah, B-17 Bomb was a 12K game. But I think Microsurgeon was originally going to be 4K and then they discovered it through 8K. Well, even 8K is very limited for the kind of graphics that I wanted to do for Microsurgeon. But to tell you the truth, when I started Microsurgeon, I originally was going to do a first-person game where you would be, zooming through the arteries and looking through veins and heading towards the heart and stuff, looking at it from a first-person perspective. But that ended up being kind of strange because when I did the prototype, we looked at it and said, what are we looking at? And the problem was you didn't have the graphics detail you have today. You couldn't really make it look like anything because it was just enough difficulty just to make it look like you were rushing through something to get to somewhere. I think at the Consumer Electronics Show in 1982, or it was 82 or 83, there was a game, 20th Century Fox put out a Fantastic Voyage game. They had the license, and they used that. That ended up being a first-person game. I don't know what everybody thought of that at the time. I know there was some positive, some negative reviews, but my personal point of view was that this just never worked first-person. And so that was when we switched before that, because my game came out at that same time. But we switched the point of view when we discovered the first person wouldn't work. And it just went to this overview kind of mappy look that you ended up with where you could scroll through the bottom. And there was two big challenges to that game. Of course, one was trying to stuff all those graphics and compress it all so you could get it into 8K. Well, less than 8K because they had to have the code too. The other big challenge of that game was how are you going to create the graphics for that game? Because we didn't really have an editor. Like when I did the PBA bowling game, all we had to do there was draw some simple graphics and then translate it into code. And that was hard enough. That was a lot of work just to get the animation in there. But so at Magic, we had a emulator hardware that we attached to the Intellivisions that had plenty of RAM in it that you never had in the Intellivision. So I was able to write a program for the emulator that basically let you do animation editing. It was sort of one of the early versions of a graphics editor for the video games industry. And other games ended up using it. A game called Atlantis, you might remember on Intellivision. The Dungeons and Dragons game, or it might have been called something else, but that was another one. There was at least 3 or 4 others that used that editor that I created to create games. And so a man named Michael Becker was the artist, and he created, I gave him like all the anatomy books that I had used to do the research for this game. And he created this wonderful piece of artwork that you probably see on the package for Microsurgeon that I obviously couldn't do exactly the same way in the graphics for the game, so I had to take each piece of that artwork and figure out how I was going to stuff it into this 8K. Well, what I ended up doing was sort of like the way fractal compression works. I wanted to basically look for patterns in the graphics that were kind of similar, and then just use the same block of graphics for each of those patterns that matched up to being similar. And it ended up being kind of a form of early compression for computer graphics. And I was able to compress this very beautiful piece of artwork that Michael had done into, I don't remember, it might have been 4 or 6K of storage for the graphics, and then I had another 2 or 3K left for the code that ran to show you the chip moving through and all the other screens that you see in Microsurgeon. So that's sort of the story of Microsurgeon, You may know the history of the Magic. The Magic hung around for another couple of years, and that was the time when Atari basically announced that sales were down, and the industry kind of had to collapse at that point. But before the collapse was fully happened, I also had time to work on a port of microsurgeon to the Texas Instruments 9948. And for those of you that are familiar with that machine, that I personally grew to very much love that machine. To me, that was my first computer. I mean, I had the Sol 20 with the 8080, and I programmed Intellivision and handheld games and stuff. But the Texas Instrument 9948 was a real computer. I mean, it had a 16-bit chip in it that had real 16-bit instructions. The television had 16-bit sort of, but they were really 10-bit instructions. And so I felt like all of a sudden I had all this wonderful computing power, and I had RAM, and the graphics were had more abilities, and it was just a load of fun to work on the TI 9948. And because I was able to put more into the game, we decided that we would make the graphics a little smaller on the screen and add that there's an operating room screen next to the patient. That if you've ever seen a TI 9948 version of microsurgeon, you have an operating room with nurses coming in and out once in a while, and every once in a while you hear like speech synthesis as well. And so my favorite, of course, is paging Dr. Levine, which was my way of honoring my mother, because she had always wanted me to be a doctor. So that's sort of my history. I guess just quickly after that, I left the Magic and went to work for a project management company. Left there and went to RCA Laboratories in New Jersey and worked on a wonderful project there. It was one of the first games ever to have motion video on CD-ROM. The technology was called DVI, which was later sold to Intel. I have many friends at Intel still, actually. And we were also one of the first places to work on the 360-degree look-around type of feature. I had done that as a prototype in the lab at RCA Labs for the game that we did, which was a kind of an educational game in the jungle where children got to look around in the jungle and explore Mayan architecture and stuff like that. And then later, I went to American Airlines and then on to Digital Pictures. You know, for Digital Pictures, doing Sega CD games and motion video. And finally, I ended up at Microsoft and worked on Windows 98, having ported a game when I was at Digital Pictures to Windows 95, which was one of the first games on Windows 95 DirectX, which is their gaming technology. It was the first version of DirectX. So I suffered through all the bugs that they had in that technology at the time. And I eventually worked, before I left Microsoft, I worked in the games group and was working on the design of the game with Alexei Pajitnov. Alexei Pajitnov was the designer of Tetris. And that was very interesting. It was really neat to get to work with him. The game did not end up getting published, but we did a lot of neat work for the Xbox at that point. So that's my story. I hope that was at least a little bit interesting for you. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer a question or two at this point. Yes?
I'm a little bit curious about the relationship that you had in Mattel between sort of like, I guess it would be the hardware guys and the software guys. Because I work in video games too, so I'm familiar with sort of programming aspects, but not programming for a specific piece of hardware. And I'm just kind of, if you could maybe go into a little more detail about like what the prototyping process was like and like just kind of back and forth between you guys. Is that safe?
Sure. We had actually had an electrical engineer and especially on the bowling, because the bowling had moving parts, we had a mechanical engineer. And Richard Chang, who was the vice president in charge of the Mattel Electronics Group, was a mechanical engineer as well. And so he worked on the handheld bowling project. As a mechanical engineer, we had an electrical engineer, software engineer, which was me. And then we had a model maker doing like I said, they're making the models, because we kept going, well, it doesn't quite feel right when you do this kind of action, so you have to change the model. So we must have gone through a dozen different models till we got that right. There was these buttons you press on the side that the mechanical engineer said was not quite working right with the way the insides were working. The electrical engineer, of course, tried to stuff all of the circuitry in there to get out of the way of these things that are moving around. It was a particularly difficult project to work on. And didn't so much have an issue there. It was actually in the medical electronics industry, working with the electrical engineer, mechanical engineer, and software engineer, where I ran into the proverbial big argument between hardware and software engineers, because it turned out they had this digital pad that the ophthalmologist would use for testing for glaucoma. We had this big bowl type of dish thing that the periscope would move around as you move the pen around. Well, it wouldn't work right sometimes. We couldn't figure out why. And they would say, well, it's a software problem. And I figured it out, there's no bugs in the software, so it's a hardware problem. We went back and forth. Finally, it turned out that they hadn't properly shielded the digital pad, and it was getting interference from the circuitry within the dish, and you run into those kinds of things. So I know in Mattel we might have had some discussions like that, it's just something more specific. Yes?
I was curious, working with Texas Instruments, was Magic actually like doing it on their own, or did TI kind of been wanting ports?
I believe, well, I know Magic talked to TI, and I think we were doing a cartridge game. I don't know exactly what the contractual relationship was, but I know that TI wanted us to do. We did Super Demon Attack, and which was Rob Fult's game, and Microsurgeon. And I was going to do, I forgot to mention this, but I think some of you might know, I was going to do a game called Wing War for the Texas Instruments computer. So, because there was already somebody working on it on Intellivision, and I got into the game, but it would never publish it. So, and again, I wish I had some chips for that one. Yes, one more.
Yeah, I have a digital pictures question.
Yes.
I know at one point Intel actually came with digital pictures and asked you guys to build games only for the 386. And they paid you money to go ahead and check the processor. Were you involved in that?
I know that they did. I know that they had a project that they were going to do a game for the 386. And I remember actually the guy that was working on that project was one of the original, he was developer of Space Wars, I think it was, one of the really early video games, the one that was like on the oscilloscope. I think it's called Space Wars. Anyway, he lived in Palo Alto and he came in to work on that. I don't know exactly what happened with that.
So I thought the story was that you were developing on 286s. So the code was all 286, but they just checked for the processor and wouldn't run if it wasn't the 386.
Well, it's possible. The game that I did a port to Windows 95. I know on that game we had like a deal where Microsoft made it so that we wouldn't run unless it was on Windows 95 with DirectX, because they didn't want it to be ported later. They didn't want it to run on the NT. People get confused that it was only really supposed to be for Windows 95. So there might have been a similar deal with the 386, but I don't remember. All right, well, thank you very much for coming. I really enjoyed talking.